Hi, my dear Astro family. Today we are going to be looking at the weekly energy pattern starting on the 16th of August until the 23rd of August. So most likely the biggest event of the week is the Saturn and Venus opposition and Mars and Neptune square. The reason why Mars and Neptune square would be important is because Mars is disposing Saturn. So therefore, it has got a lot to do with that Saturn and Venus opposition as well. But the major or the main character of the week is going to be the Sun because it makes a bunch of aspects. So let me just get the dates out of the way. So we've got 16th, 17th of August, Mars square Neptune, and at the same time it's in quincunx to Pluto. And on the same day, Sun trines Pallas Athene as well. On the 17th, Venus is going to sextile Jupiter. On the 20th, Sun trines Vesta. 21st, Venus opposition to Saturn. 22nd, Sun conjuncts North Node, Mercury trines Pallas Athene. And on the 23rd, Sun is going to be moving into the sign of Virgo, and straight away it's going to make a trine to Chiron. So this is what we are going to be discussing here today. And, oh yeah, for a second I saw myself disappearing. So these are going to be the aspect, and at the end I'm going to be giving you the secret degrees to pay attention to as well when we are doing a bit of a summary. So the first up is on the 16th and on the 17th of August, Mars is in Cancer and making a square to Neptune. So, Mars is actually the planetary ruler, the host of Neptune in the sign of Aries, right? So therefore it means Neptune relies on Mars to ground its vision and pioneer its ideas. However, Mars is placed in the sign of Cancer, a sign where Mars operates through defense, emotional security, kind of like indirect action, passive-aggressive behaviors. So the execution of these ideas gets a bit clouded here. We can get very sensitive, we can get a bit diverted as well. So what really happens here is that high ideas, Neptune, meet this reactive or passive-aggressive kind of defenses. So therefore, it's very easy to confuse emotional impulse or anxiety with intuition or even irritation as well. So you can have this sudden urge to initiate kind of like a new chapter in your life, right? Because with Neptune, we've got a vision, and then Aries is the sign of initiation. But we can run into hesitation, we can run into guilt, or kind of like this emotional second guessing, which is Mars in the sign of Cancer. Now, also, you might want to be rescuing situations or people without clear boundaries as well. And then you can end up feeling resentful, depleted, misunderstood as well, kind of like undervalued. And because Mars represents anger, especially in the sign of Cancer, this is the suffocating anger, this is the suppressed anger. So that anger and boundary setting may come out sideways rather than through direct, kind of like constructive confrontation. Think of Cancer, where Mars in Cancer, which is a bit of a passive aggressive type of energy. So instead of walking up to someone and then telling them that you hurt me, we're just going to be crying, for example, or slamming doors, or smashing glasses and so forth, but we avoid certain type of confrontations. Also, imagine, for example, if it happens in your 10th house, for example, right? So maybe a boss of yours is going to hurt you, and instead of addressing the lack of structure or the constructive criticism kind of directly, we're going to be venting quietly behind closed doors or to other people, to our partner, right? Let's say if Neptune is in the 7th house, it's very easy to kind of project our frustration onto our partnerships. So just make sure that you try to speak out your frustration rather than kind of like projecting that onto a different area of your life. But also because Cancer represents family members. So imagine a family member ask for kind of like a favor. And that could be actually straining a little bit your personal time, your downtime as well. Now imagine that Mars is in your 11th house and Neptune is in the 8th house, right? So you might agree to something out of guilt, or you just want to be saving someone, but you are still feeling somehow irritable or resentful during the process because maybe you have got hunches there, right? Ooh, I shouldn't be lending money to this friend of mine or to this family member, and so forth. So you're going to have to be able to learn to say no. You're going to have to state very clear boundaries here. And just remember, you don't have to over explain yourself. You don't have to be apologizing for having limits. Right. Also, it could indicate that your energy level drops slightly bit, especially if one of these planets are falling into your sixth house. So imagine that you have got this new physical regime going on based on kind of like a sudden inspiration, which is Mars. But then all of a sudden we feel tired. There is a certain type of a burnout there, and then we want to be giving up on the good habits and so forth. So the solution here is that don't rush into something potentially on plus minus 2 days from this aspect, actually a week or so, because you might be giving up on something, right? Especially if we don't start seeing the results. Maybe with Mars and Neptune, it's good to go a bit of a swimming, doing certain type of restorative routines, for example, and just remember that consistency is always going to be the key success factor. Now, on the very same day, we have got the Sun in the sign of Leo trine Pallas Athene in the sign of Aries. So this is a fire trine. We've got a fixed fire meeting a cardinal fire. Imagine the fixed fire as kind of like a, what's the word in English I'm looking for? A fireplace, right? So the fire is contained there. And then the cardinal fire, which is kind of like an open flame type of energy, comes around and then puts a bit of fuel onto that fireplace, right? So that the flames can be bigger, more visual, and so forth. So the sun provides vital force, creativity, while Pallas Athene brings sharp strategic intelligence, pattern recognition, and tactical execution to the table. So in fire signs, this trine creates this decisiveness. It gives you clarity. It gives you a lot of intuition and strategy to operate kind of like as one. So you can spot, for example, your direct path forward and have the confidence to execute it kind of immediately. But you do those through strategic movements. It really feels like that this archetype is going to be about strategic courage. You have got this vision that aligns with swift, kind of like decisive actions or even problem solving as well. So it really feels like that this is a day when we should be kind of like making a decision about our path forward. And while we have got the Mars and Neptune, which can create a bit of a confusion, I feel like the Sun and Pallas Athene trine is helping you to cut through confusion or trying to help you find clean solutions rather than over deliberating, overthinking on certain type of things. So, but also, this is the fire trines are often about creative leadership. So you can be presenting proposals, you can take charge of a situation. It's about embracing and putting your charisma on stage. What we need to be careful with is commending, because of course that might be a bit of a shadow side of this aspect. Also, imagine that maybe it happens in your sixth house. One of them is in your sixth house, right? So you can have a bit of a bottleneck or a bit of a deadlock occurring in a project of yours at work. And then, everyone is just waiting for your approval, your consensus. But instead of overanalyzing minor details, we are actually trying out little different things, which is often just about a short-term solution. So I'm trying to step in, for example, with a simplified kind of like bold strategy. I'm going to be assigning the roles. I'm going to be getting the momentum moving forward. Also, if it's, let's say, in your seventh house, one of them is in your seventh house, this could really talk to you about negotiations or even having difficult conversations. So maybe if you need to be resolving a disagreement regarding a contract, relationship, personal boundaries, and so forth. So instead of emotional reactivity that the Mars and Neptune square could be causing, you map out the core issue, and then we are going to be addressing it very firmly, kind of like fairly as well. But maybe one of these planets are in your fifth house, right? So that's a creative concept there. It could be great for marketing, launching. It could be a personal goal of yours and something that you might have put on the back burner, and then you pull it out of the drawer and then let's get going, let's move towards that. But first I'm going to be outlining a master plan, a master strategy, and I'm going to be able to see both the broad vision and the tactical execution steps. So it's a nice aspect. I think what you don't need to be doing with this aspect is to kind of like wait for approval to take initiatives. Make sure that the ego and the pride doesn't override practical tactics. Make sure that it doesn't get you second guessing decisions once there is a logical kind of like path ahead of you and that's super clear. And I think watch out for aggressiveness because firmness is often enough. So that would be the 16th of August. Let's move on to 17th of August. And that's when Venus in Libra sextiles Jupiter in Leo. And then straight after, Venus is actually running into a opposition to Saturn. So to be precise with the dates there, 17th, Venus and Jupiter sextile, and then the opposition between Venus and Saturn is going to be happening on the 21st of August. So Venus in Libra sextile Jupiter, Venus, it's in home sign. So we call it as a domicile position. And Venus brings a lot of diplomacy, charm, aesthetic elegance, social grace, even it kind of embraces the etiquette here, right? And it makes a beautiful, easy, a 60-degree sextile to Jupiter in a very regal position, and that's Leo. And Jupiter is trying to amplify warmth, generosity, social rapport, creative optimism there. However, Venus in Libra will be making an opposition to Saturn retrograde in the sign of Aries. And I'm putting these together because it's easier to look at an aspect configuration rather than breaking them down one by one. Even though one is taking place on the 17th, the other one is taking place on the 21st, but you can really think of it as Venus translating the light between Saturn and Jupiter trine, okay? So Venus is bringing them together either way. So, let's say you made a contact, for example, to someone with the Venus and Jupiter sextile. And then straight after, Venus runs into this 180 type of polarity with Saturn retrograde in Aries, where important to remember Saturn is in fall and it's retrograde. So it's reviewing past commitments, it's reviewing past boundaries. So we open the day with quite high expectations, and maybe it's an invitation to a party, for example, or we've got ideas about how to expand our social, kind of like financial opportunity. But then there is a demand there for accountability. There is a cost evaluation happening. There is a realistic boundary setting. So, when we have got a planet of social grace meeting this stern reality check, then it kind of indicates that the opportunities that popped up to us are unfortunately were not as realistic. And yes, maybe imagine that someone you are trying to collaborate with and then promising you the stars, because Jupiter has got the tendency to do that. Jupiter in Leo is often about bragging, often about saying big things, because I want to be in the center of attention. And then after Venus runs into that opposition with Saturn, unfortunately, we start seeing that half of those are not going to get delivered. So this is about social promises that potentially could be failing, or someone is telling you that these are the expenses, and then unfortunately maybe it's going to cost you way more than anticipated. So it's a little bit like you have to be looking at the price tag and the terms of that collaboration, of that connection. I think there is a lot of desire with Jupiter and Venus sextile for smooth, kind of easy connections, or even indulgence as well. But then we run into the planet of duties, right? Or we run into an emotional distance. Venus in Libra wants relationship, Jupiter in Leo wants to have fun. So imagine you go on a date, and maybe that's going to be the bestest date ever. But then after, Saturn is kind of like an emotional distance there, right? And the retrogression kind of shows that the communication slows down and so forth. So you are kind of like scratching your head. What has happened here? Why is there this temporary friction there? And somehow with Saturn in Aries, we start thinking that the person is not mature enough. Right? If you are in relationships, of course, this could indicate facing relationship friction or even financial restriction within the partnership as well. So often this could even indicate that that you don't feel that the partner values what you kind of like bring to the table. Also, this could kind of indicate to me in a relationship that, let's say, you make plans for an upscale dinner or a social gathering with friends, and you are super excited about it. And then midway through, someone brings up maybe a personal grievance or an issue at the dinner table, kind of like ruining the atmosphere there. Okay? Or because Saturn is kind of like a bill, right? So it's not necessarily bill as in something that you have to pay for, but because it's retrograde, it could be kind of like a past grievance, something that we don't necessarily feel too good about. Okay, so Venus in Libra is trying to maintain this diplomatic composure, but Saturn is addressing this underlying issue kind of calmly and often is just presenting the facts. And Jupiter is trying to make sure that it doesn't get escalated as much. However, the negative side of it is it's going to become a theatrical kind of like drama. So let's just be very mindful about that. And also, Venus and Jupiter together can really talk to us about design, or you want to be upgrading your wardrobe. I mean, imagine one of them is in your first house right now, and then you have got, and then you go on a bit of a shopping spree, right? And then Saturn can come into the picture, and unfortunately, maybe that's a partner, because then Saturn would be in your seventh house and telling you that why do you need to be wasting so much money on something? Or I can even imagine that you are working on a creative project if one of them is in your fifth house, for example, and then somehow maybe the deadlines or the production is kind of like slowing you down, and therefore this would be an aspect which asks you to trim the fat and keep it minimal, and that's Saturn. So what I would do with these aspect patterns, I think I would leverage on initial warmth to open productive dialogues in partnership. I would be auditing my budgets. I would be looking at contracts or partnership agreements. I would choose quality and enduring substance over instant gratification, because unfortunately Venus and Jupiter is always going to be craving for something fancy. And you can really use this aspect pattern to address structural relationship issues, but with maturity. What I wouldn't do with this aspect, I wouldn't overpromise on favors, time, or financial resources as well. I wouldn't be looking at kind of delayed responses, for example, as personal attack or rejection. Maybe the person has got something else to do. And I wouldn't be spending excessively to impress others or even to buy peace or harmony in your life. And don't sweep red flags under the rug to maintain a certain type of a superficial harmony. What's very important to mention here that the Venus and Saturn cycle started on March 8th on 2 degree of Aries. And at that time, Neptune was there as well. So the importance of mentioning it is because there is always an initial cycle. And when we get to the opposition phase, that's a culmination of something that started. And this time around, it started on March 8th, right? So we call it as a synodic cycle. It started on the world axis. So therefore, this aspect is going to be affecting the entire world, not just you on a personal level if you have got planets on 2 degree. Okay, imagine that as a seeding moment, let's say for new relationship dynamics, financial commitments, self-worth, for example, contractual boundaries. And because it's Aries, it demanded raw courage. It demanded you stepping into self-reliance. An opposition, which is taking place on the 17th of August, remember that, that's a culmination phase of that, okay? So imagine that as a full moon. It would be highlighting something, especially with Saturn retrograde, that the initial seed was not planted properly, okay? So there are structural agreement issues. There are certain type of relationship choices or relationship patterns that are emerging again, okay? Or financial commitments initiated back in early March now reach their kind of like climax, right? The exposure. Or if you swept something under the carpet back in March, then this could be the day or week when actually it's going to get exposed for you. So, you know, the initial stage was 2 degree of Aries, right? So the question could have popped up there. What are my non-negotiable boundaries, personal autonomy, structural costs of my goals, right? And then now we've got Venus sitting on 13 degree of Libra to 13 degree of Aries. So, you know, these compromises, partnership dynamics or imbalances or unfairness could be somehow exposed to you. So therefore, I would say that this aspect configuration is not necessarily just a bump in the road, okay? It's more of a direct audit or a reality checkpoint of the commitments, boundaries, relationships, and so forth that got set in motion around March. So let me give you an example, okay? Maybe from a relationship point of view, right? Maybe you made a choice to be independent, or you might have started dating someone, or you redefine boundaries in your relationship, and that's in March. Now, August, maybe this is going to be a key conversation, and the person brings up to you that unfortunately I feel restricted, I feel neglected, I feel pressured by you, by your schedule, by your expectations, and so forth. So, of course, the reaction could be that I'm going to be reacting to it, I'm going to become defensive, I'm not going to feel good about myself, and so forth. But maybe you want to be treating this conversation as kind of like a grown-up, mature review of that relationship. So are we on the same page? Do we need to be together? And so forth. Or you might have done something, you know, finance-wise. Maybe in March you committed you committed to a financial restructure. Maybe you purchased an equipment, an asset, and then this could be the midway through the cycle. So you realize that this item is actually not serving your work, and then you want to sell it, for example, or even it can indicate, unfortunately, that item could be breaking down. Now, that would be a topic, for example, if it was happening in your 6th house. Okay? So, this would be the Saturn, Venus, Jupiter configuration. And then we've got the Sun and, so we spoke about the Sun and Pallas Athene trine, but then the Sun after makes a trine to Vesta in Aries too. And then the Sun makes a conjunction to South Node, and then the Sun enters Virgo, and straight away it makes a trine to Chiron. So remember that the Sun, Pallas Athene went down on the 16th. Sun and Vesta trine is going to be happening on the 20th. Then the Sun makes a conjunction to the South Node on the 22nd. And then on the 23rd, Sun enters Virgo and makes a trine to Chiron. So, of course, we've got quite a big aspect configuration here. And chronology is always very important in astrology because the events are building on that. So step one was the Sun and the Pallas Athene trine, which I have spoken about already. Step two is the Sun and Vesta trine, which is also a fire trine, right? So we had that strategic type of trine with Pallas Athene, and then now Sun connects with Vesta, who is the keeper of sacred flame, devotion. It's about focus, right? So there is a dedication here. There is a clarity of purpose, and you lock in on what truly deserves your time and your energy, and you commit to something that you kind of made promise to, okay? So then step three is the Sun and South Node conjunction, where very interesting because the planet of vitality merges with the point of release and past patterns and kind of like karmic shedding. So it feels like that you are clearing your ego. You are shedding performance roles. You are in a definite moment to be able to release pride-driven demands, outdated leadership styles, or those exhausting needs for external validation. Then the Sun moves into Virgo, which, of course, it's moving from a fixed sign into, which was very expressive, right? Into a mutable, kind of like more pragmatic earth of Virgo. So this is when the party ends and pretty much the operational work begins. So if we came up with a strategy and then we committed to it, then maybe with the Sun and the South Node conjunction, we are going to be like, okay, the party is over. Now it's time to focus. It's time to work. It's time to kind of create a system to that creative vision that I have come up with. And I'm going to do something on a daily basis. I'm going to be refining my craft. I'm going to be making concrete steps to that execution. And then Sun immediately, step 5, makes a trine to Chiron in Taurus, right? So that's a tangible healing through really practical routines. So I'm going to repair my self-worth. I'm going to be working on my stamina. I'm going to be working on my security by honoring really realistic step-by-step habits. So maybe I've got the creative vision. Now I'm going to have to sort out the finances for it. I'm going to have the self-worth that, yes, I'm ready to step out. So especially if you have got any of these in your first house, so therefore you are a Leo rising sign, you have been thinking a lot that, you know what, I need to be putting myself out there. I need to be on a stage, right? I need to get going. And maybe you have talked yourself out of all these because of the lack of confidence, because maybe you allowed someone to kind of tell you otherwise. Okay, so it's about the ignition of devotion to your core work, which is Vesta, stripping away old ego traps or fatigue, which is the South Node, and then you're shifting into this really organized, person, Virgo, and then we start building a real physical and material confidence and reality, but through consistent actions. And that would be Chiron in the sign of Taurus. So I think there is a lot of inspiration happening here with the sun in Leo and all that trine it makes in the sign of Aries. But now we're going to start getting devoted to it, right? It's not just a theoretical strategy. It's more about discipline, heartfelt commitments to what matter the most to you. And it feels like that you are detoxing your ego, right? And then maybe you have been chasing applause, or you have been chasing validation from your partner, and then you want them to tell you that you are on the right path and so forth. But that you have to realize that that has been draining your vitality. So I'm going to choose authenticity over performance, and I'm going to go towards something that I truly want. And Sun and Chiron is simply about having to heal that chronic feeling of not doing enough or not being good enough by building sustainable value day by day. So, of course, because the sun is in the sign of Virgo and healing Chiron, yeah, healing Chiron by that sunlight, right? So therefore, a lot of health topics could be popping up here as well. And I feel like that Vesta is telling you that you have to be recommit to your non-negotiable, let's say physical training or personal health practices, but with this renewed discipline. And the Sun conjunction to South Node, it's about acknowledging the past mistakes that you made, for example, in that diet or in that fitness road. And maybe it's the realization that I wanted to do it to impress others. So what if I'm going to be doing it to be impressing myself, right? Because I wanted to create this certain image. So it's not about the image anymore. So therefore, the Sun in Virgo, trine Chiron could indicate that I'm going to be simplifying my meal prep. I'm going to be scheduling a body work like a physio session, right? Or I'm going to be adjusting my schedule so that I'm not going to be too reckless about it. I'm not going to be too kind of like intense about it. But of course, Leo is about leadership as well. So I can imagine that you rally team members around a dedicated objective, setting really high standards. And then the Sun conjunction to South Node, maybe it's a situation where you have to be letting go of the fact that you need to be right all the time, or you need to be the big boss, or you need to be the center of attention, right? And then that could be kind of like easing up the team friction, or that could be promoting further productivity, because the Sun in Virgo is going to be about productivity. And then finally, we're going to be able to deliver something practical. I'm going to be able to get constructive feedback. And I'm going to be focusing on refining systems and workflows and productivity and all those goodies, rather than just criticizing everyone, writing, and then creating this psychological kind of like upheaval, really. So this is how I would do that aspect pattern, or I would use that aspect pattern. Now we also have got on the 22nd, Mercury is still in the sign of Leo, trine Pallas Athene. So Mercury is going to go through the same road as the Sun, but it's mainly happening next week. And Mercury is the planet of cognition, communication, speech, but also can represent strategies as well. So Mercury steps into that exact same fire trine with Pallas Athene, who is the master of strategies, right? The pattern recognition, kind of like the tactical warrior. So, Mercury, because it's in a fire sign, it doesn't necessarily get bogged down in endless analysis, or Mercury in Leo is commanding, it's expressive, it's persuasive, right? So, and then Pallas comes up with strategies to solve a problem. So what it really feels like is that you are articulating what has to be done. And your mind is kind of like getting focused on how things should be getting done. The negative side of it is, like I said, it could be about commending. Your words can carry dramatic ways. Negotiations can move faster as well, or complex problems can be solved with something bold but kind of simple strokes. So that's really positive there. So therefore, I would say that if you want to be pitching a business idea, for example, or you want to be explaining something bold or something dramatic, then you can really do that because there's a lot of charisma there. Also, you might be able to identify issues like what is broken in plants, for example, and you can be cutting out this useless fluff, and therefore you can really deliver kind of like an actionable solution to things. Or it's about speaking with confidence or writing with confidence as well. So hesitation, second guessing kind of drop away with this aspect pattern. So I really kind of like that for us, basically. So to make some type of world predictions, right? I think there are some geopolitical frictions, some indirect military maneuvers, because Mars is in Cancer squaring Neptune in Aries, right? So that could, for example, talk to us about certain type of naval kind of like tensions or disputes or blockades or confusion in certain type of naval territories, like when the ship is getting lost, for example, right? Or a navigation system could be going down and then I kind of like get to some wild waters in a way. But also this is a conflictual type of energy pattern there, which could really talk to us about miscalculated, let's say, military directives or confusion in what things are said or commanded. Then we've got Venus and Jupiter and Saturn configuration, which would really talk to us about diplomatic announcements or international kind of like summits. And we are super kind of like optimistic about it. But then we run into that opposition, which could really talk to us about that we have to be reviewing our treaties, trade programs, policies as well, for example, especially if policies were born, for example, in early spring. However, I can imagine that credit terms are being tightened a little bit, or disputes over tariffs or border or taxes and so on. And then with the Sun, Mercury, Pallas Athene, Vesta Sun, South Node kind of like triggers, I can imagine that because the Sun and the South Node is going to be purging a bit of a public, like it's going to be forcing a bit of a public purge of a leader or a celebrity figure or kind of like a political strongman. So it's someone whose authority was built on performative prestige rather than substance. So that person can be questioned, actually. And then Sun moves into Virgo and then trine in Chiron. So there could be a lot of focus on food, grains, resources, the logistics of those, supply chain, agriculture, labor forces, and so forth, or the resources of the army members. So these could be some of the headlines that might be popping up in the next 1 week. So that's the weekly energy pattern, everyone. So do we have any questions at all? In the meantime, let me just invite you for my upcoming drawing test course starting in about 2 weeks' time. So if you haven't signed up yet, then I encourage you to do so because the price will be going up shortly. It's going to be a 24-hour course, and I'm going to be teaching you how to spot behavioral, medical, past tendencies and future tendencies in your drawings. This is something that I have been doing for a good 25 years now. So there's a lot of knowledge to hand over there. And it's super good for any practitioners or just people who want to get to know their kids better. For example, I think it's a $250 course, 24 hours. I think it's a very reasonable price. So if you are curious, check it out on my website, AstroViktor.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe and all those lovely things. Share the video with others. That would be much appreciated. I believe I always try to bring something unique to the table. Now, let me share the screen. And then we are going to be, so I'm going to want to give you the degrees as well, where all these are happening. Here you go. Oh, so I guess you should guys be able to see the screen. So first up was Mars in the sign of Cancer squaring Neptune. So it happens on 4 degrees. So the reason why I want to show you the degrees is because if you have got any planets on these sensitive degrees, then that's going to be the most important aspect in your chart. So if you've got any planets on 4 degree Cancer, 4 degree of Aries, this could become actually super important. And at the same time, you also see that the Sun is in trine to Pallas Athene. Then if we move a little bit further, then you will be able to see that on the 20th, Sun is going to make a trine to Vesta. And then if we move a little bit further, just 2 days further on the 22nd, the Sun is making a conjunction to the South Node. So therefore, it's opposing the North Node as well. Then we see that the Sun is going to be moving into the sign of Virgo and immediately makes a trine to Chiron. So that would be on 0 degree of the Earth signs pretty much. Okay, and then we spoke about the Venus and Jupiter-Saturn configuration. So let me show you that too. So you will see that the Venus and Jupiter sextile is going to be happening on 10 degree of Libra to 10 degree of Leo. And then a few days after, Venus runs into an opposition on 14 degree of Libra to 14 degree of Aries with Saturn. So these would be the major aspects of the week. I didn't look at minor asteroids for today because this video is already a good 45-minute long. So therefore, I didn't want to kind of like bore you with too much information. But one of the things that I wanted to show you, and we spoke about those last week. So when you look at the out-of-bound planets, can you see that there are 3 out-of-bound planets happening at this week? So we have got the moon. Moon always goes out of bound in Sagittarius, and it kind of finishes its out of bound period in the sign of Capricorn. This is something that I have taught before about. It's available on my website. Then you can see that Pluto is out of bound and Mars is out of bound as well. So a couple of words about that. You just need to be super mindful that our emotions are running really wild. And therefore, any type of sensitivity or any type of aggression, for example, is just making people super kind of like hypersensitive, super reactive, super feisty, and therefore it's very easy to get into arguments. So just please watch out for that. We can be really snapping at people, you know, on social media, in our partnership, and so forth, even at our kids. So just be super mindful about this configuration. Okay. Yeah, I know I'm on 21st of, yeah, that's fine. 21st. So you will see that the moon is going to be stopping its out of bound period somewhere. Oh, sorry. Somewhere right here. So on August 24th. So guys, this is the weekly energy pattern. Will it influence my sun on 12 degrees in Leo? Not so much anymore. There is nothing that would be triggering the sun on 12 degree of Leo. I mean, yeah, Venus is on 14 and Saturn is on 14 as well. But sun on 12 degree of Leo feels just a little bit too far away right now because Venus has already passed that degree. Oh, well, the Sun and, Venus and Jupiter sextile could be, though, triggering your Sun because, um, um, because both of them are going to be triggering your Sun, right? So Venus is going to be triggering it in 2 days after, and Jupiter is going to be triggering that in a couple of weeks' time. So surely, actually, Venus and Jupiter sextile could be triggering your Sun. Okay, so thank you very much for being here, and I will see you in my next video. And we are going to be meeting next week because we're going to have to talk about the Jupiter and Saturn trine coming up very shortly. And I'm going to be breaking that down for all 12 signs as well. So take care, everyone.